CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.
Welcome to yet another episode of our Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Beginkos Moyo, the Director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment at the West Business School in Johannesburg. We are at the sidelines of the 4th African Philanthropy Conference held in Sali, Senegal, and I'm joined excitedly by Mamadou Biteye. Mamadou Biteye is the Executive Director of the Africa Capacity Building Foundation based in Harare. Welcome to the conversation, Mamadou.
Thank you very much, Becky.
And thank you so much for making the time. I've always wanted to have an opportunity to sit down with you and just harvest a lot of your experiences, because you are one of the very few people that I know who has a global influence, having worked in Africa in different countries, but also worked outside Africa. But let's start with where you are right now at the Africa Capacity Building Foundation. For those that might not have an idea or an understanding of what the foundation does, can we give them a sense of what you do, what you seek to achieve, and maybe some of the projects that people might look out for in order to understand the work that you do?
Yeah. Now, first of all, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm extremely pleased to have this conversation with you. I joined the African Capacity Building Foundation last year in May, so it's a little bit over a year since I've joined. But the ACBF has been in existence for 32 years. It was created in 1991 by 12 African states, and with the support of their institutional partners, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and UNDP. And the purpose of ACBF was threefold. It was also the time of the structural adjustments in Africa. And the purpose was really, number one, to build capacity for civil servants in these countries, particularly macroeconomists, were very scarce. So the few that were in these countries really were subject to competition by the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, etc. So there was really need to build that more Africans with that expertise. The second thing was really to build capacity for evidence-based policy making. And that meant also creating institutions affiliated with the Ministry of Economy and Planning that could conduct the research, provide the insights and the evidence that that these policymakers and practitioners could use to devise their plans or devise policy. And also, the other thing was also supporting universities, especially universities, to review, enrich, and adapt their curricula to new needs in terms of capacity. So over time, the foundation has trained over 50,000 people who today are in public sectors across Africa, holding high ministerial, governor of central bank roles, etc. So they are very diverse and spread across the continent. Many institutions that has been built also have been extremely influential in actually providing the knowledge that actually directed many of the development policies and programs. The third reason was also to have an African institution on the ground that could play the role of a donor coordination mechanism. The World Bank, many of the bilaterals and other multilaterals channeled resources earmarked for capacity building through ACBF, which regranted these resources to governments, government public sector agencies, but also civil society organizations, universities, etc.
Yeah.
Over time, that has changed. In 2016-17, after over 20 years of existence, the funding model changed. So the donors actually reduced the funding because they felt that after 20 years, the organization should have been mature enough to go on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the organization has not been able to reinvent itself.
Yeah.
You know, it was still continuing to look for unrestricted funding because despite the very amazing impact they had, actually they were in a comfort zone of receiving unrestricted funding and doing that. So they wanted to continue that.
Yeah.
So followed probably a period of 10 years where the organization was trying to pursue the funding of that old model.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I joined that last year to really look at how we can change and give a new orientation to this organization, because capacity building is crucial in Africa.
Yeah.
What we did was work on a new strategy, and this new strategy was really oriented towards looking at how we build capacities in the areas, the most pressing issues that African countries were faced with. And obviously in consultation with the 40 African member countries, but also the institutional partners. I forgot to say that in 2017, ACBF became a specialized agency of the African Union for capacity building.
Yeah.
That's in recognition for its footprint and impact on the continent. That didn't make ACBF a member of or an organ of AU, but conferred upon ACBF the legitimacy to speak on behalf of the African Union on matters related to capacity building, but also expanded its mandate to supporting the AU Commission, but also the REX in terms of capacity building needs. So our new strategy now is focused on 4 key issue areas: climate change adaptation, where we specifically want to focus on capacity for project preparation. The biggest challenge that we see in Africa is that every country has their NDCs, nationally determined contribution, developed. They have their national adaptation plans, but translating these into bankable projects is a big challenge. When you talk to funders, they also see a challenge, the lack of a pipeline of bankable projects. So we see there a market failure, and we believe that there is opportunity to really build capacities for project preparation, not only for central government, but also for decentralized governments, but also for local private sector. And then our second one is around agribusiness and food security, food sovereignty, recognizing the vulnerability in terms of provision of food for African countries that has been revealed by COVID and the war in Ukraine, and prioritized by African countries. So here we want to really support member countries in terms of policy and regulatory reforms that can incentivize increased investment in the agribusiness sector. And second is supporting capacities of SMEs and small, medium industries in terms of food processing and strengthening the value chains, because that is extremely important, because 30% of everything that is produced on the continent is lost due to inefficiencies. So building capacities for food processing will have also an impact on reducing the food bill in Africa. We produce primary products that we actually export, but we import processed food. So building that capacity will address that, but also will create wealth for the farmers and people active in the value chains. Our third impact area is trade as an engine of economic development. We want to address two issues. One is the capacity for domestication of trade agreements. AFCFTA is a flagship project of Agenda 2063. Everybody is excited about it. But many of these regional or sub-regional trade agreements aren't fully implemented because of the problem of domestication. Countries sign the agreements, they ratify them through their parliaments. In some countries, it is even signed by the president into a law. But then what is not being done is the last mile of reforming existing national laws and also reforming the playbooks of agents that work day in and day out in implementing this. So that's why the full benefits of these agreements are not received. So we want to focus on really helping countries in terms of that domestication and capacity. And the other aspect is also the trade agreements remain highly technical instruments that remain at the high level there. But when you look at the bulk of our private sector, which is our SMEs, actually they are either not aware of these trade agreements or they don't understand. It's highly sophisticated for them. They don't understand what are the provisions in these agreements that they can leverage to increase their access to cross-border trade. So that capacity building in translating the trade agreements, whether be it in ECOWAS or SADC or any other region, but also with AFCFTA, bringing them to a simple, palatable language that a business person can utilize to increase their access to cross-border trading is what we want to do. And the fourth and last impact area is really around economic and social governance, focusing on three things. One is our bread and butter, continued support on research to support evidence-based policymaking. But we're adding also regulation because there is a lack of regulatory capacity. And I am one who believes that regulation is a first step in policy implementation. One thing is to do policy, the second thing is to implement them. Second is about capacity for taxation in view of increased domestic resource mobilization. And this is really supporting tax administrations, tax training institute to really embrace new approaches, new technology such as digitization, but also soft skills that allow them to engage with citizens and taxpayers, because really in fine, taxation is an issue of a social contract, and that requires that good understanding. And lastly, capacities for public finance management. Not technical capacities, but really soft skills capacities. Really about how do you, what is it about transformative leadership? What capacities people need to curb illicit financial flows, which is a big matter of public finance management. How do you manage public finance management in an inclusive way in society? How do you do purpose-driven public finance management? Because that also is extremely linked to the first point, which is domestic resource mobilization. Citizens will be happy taxpayers like the Finnish people only if they see that the public finances are well managed, they are transparent, and they are legible, and actually they are seeing the services that are provided. So we are looking at really whose capacity needs to be built in what area, and how do we do it in the most effective way. But then how do we measure the results of that and the impact of that, so that we can tell the story of our contribution into an inclusive and sustainable economic growth in Africa.
So thank you for that, because I think a lot of people hear about the foundation, but they probably don't understand how it works. And thanks for giving that background. You know, when you were giving your keynote here at the 4th Africa Philanthropy Conference, one of the things that you called for is for philanthropic institutions, donors, and many other actors to work together with the foundation. For our audience who happen not to have been part of this conference, would you be in a position to just identify a couple of the key points that you were making yesterday, so that at least those that did not participate can understand how they can also work closely with the foundation?
Yeah, you know, we are in the business of capacity building, and this is, as I said, human capital development in terms of skills building in different areas, but it is also about institution building.
Yeah.
Because as I said, it's not one without the other. They go together. You need the talent, but you need the talent in a conducive institutions that work to have the impact that you need. So if we look at the philanthropic sector, I think that, especially in Africa, I think that many things are taken for granted.
Yeah.
I think they see capacity building more about how to support communities to build their capacities in different areas and in different ways. But do they really stop and say, are we the best people to do that? Do we have the skills and the knowledge to do that? Do we have the best specialists to do that? So what type of skills that do we need to have? How do we build that talent within the foundations? And that was really the point to me, to be more effective, because we see a lot of work being done. Sometimes the impact can be mitigated. Sometimes it's not sustainable, etc. So to me, all of that comes to, there is a great part of expertise as well. And also, I think that the needs of people we support in a changing world are also changing. You know, when we talk about fintechs today, you know, if you don't have that expertise, how can you support people access, for instance, to fintechs? Because today, maybe fintechs have brought into financial inclusion millions of people that otherwise wouldn't have that access. But there are a lot of safeguarding issues. There are a lot of issues of dispute, because not every story of access is a positive story. So there are other issues. So if you are supporting that, do you have the right skills in your staff, the right talent in your partnership actually to support that? That's the point I was making, to say that actually it's really extremely important to also build the skills of people in the philanthropic sector so that they can embrace all of these new dimensions, new domains, you know, to be convinced and keep abreast of what is going on and be able to have an informed conversation with actors in the sector and also make the right kind of decision. That's one part. The other part also is the institutions themselves. I don't think that many of them have sustainability challenges, you know. It's the traditional model. How do you collect money from the donors and how do you redistribute that money? In different ways. But should it be the same business model, like one size fits all for all organizations? You know, are there other different business models that they can think about? How can you generate resources for your foundation to support your program, because also you are really giving high value services to your partners, not to say beneficiaries? I think what are the issues around transparency, accountability, that causes a lot of problems in terms of even the space, the regulatory spaces that can support the growth of philanthropy, the philanthropic sector. You know, we know many organizations that operate in a country but they never give a report to the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
They never report to the global public and society in general.
Yeah.
Only the initiated know what is going on.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of a
Yeah.
conversation among ourselves,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and that is not in a nature to garner, you know, societal and broader support to the sector.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of questions I think that
Yeah.
we really need to look at as a sector to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And the last thing is that many of them, there is a lot of dispersion. You know, we have many small organizations with small or little funding, you know, that they can do a few projects, small funding, the impact is limited, very localized, etc.
Yeah.
But foundations do not really, philanthropic do not come together to mutualize their resources, their expertise, their influence, etc., to sort of create a platform to tackle one big issue of big magnitude that could involve a systems change, you know. And this is also something that we need to look at actually as we want to really be more impactful.
And so, you know, as you were introducing and talking about the Africa Capacity Building Foundation, you mentioned areas such as trade, agriculture, capacity building, climate change, among others. And it occurred to me that you probably were one of the most prepared to actually lead the foundation, because in your prior life, almost all of those issues occupied you. I remember talking to you sometime and reading about you. In your early years, you're already focusing on issues of microfinance here in Senegal and many others. And so maybe let's connect the dots now and look at some of the issues that you have been involved with in your professional life, starting with, you know, as soon as you graduate from university, what are the key issues that Mamadou is engaged with? What drives Mamadou to do those? What are the institutions that you are working for? And then we move all the way up to your last engagement with Visa in Dubai. So maybe let's start with, you know, immediately after graduation. What are the key issues that occupied Mamadou then?
You know, actually, as a young African, you know, I'm an agricultural economist, so I thought that I would work in agriculture. But my first job actually was Connex. I worked for a consulting firm that hired me to help do an identification and assessment of village cereal banks across Senegal. Because at the time, the entity that is in charge of food security in Senegal wanted to know how many cereal banks exist in Senegal, where they are located, and probably to understand what is the infrastructure in place and how to preposition stocks to respond to, you know, food crisis and all of that. You know, that was really a very interesting engagement. Obviously, I was still very young, inexperienced, but my boss actually really trained me a lot in terms of, you know, how do you prepare interview sheets? How do you conduct that? How do you lead a team? You know, and how do you manage a team of those who are going to do the surveys and all of that? How do you bring the information together? How do you write a report? Not a report like academic and all of that I used to write as a student, but you're now writing a report in a professional way, you know, that kind of thing. That was really informative in that sense, in terms of doing that. But also it gave me a huge opportunity because I traveled across Senegal. Before that, I knew only 2 cities in Senegal. I knew Dakar and I knew Kaolack, which is 200 kilometers away, because that's where my parents come from. And my grandparents were there. I used to go there to visit. But this project actually allowed me to travel across
the country.
Across the country.
Yeah.
I did that for 1 year. We finished the project. And then actually I was hired by the Agricultural Credit Bank here in Senegal to coordinate a financial inclusion program called the Project of Small Rural Projects in Senegal. That was co-financed by IFAD and the World Bank. And my task was to manage the loan fund and identify beneficiaries in the forms of small-scale farmers, women artisans, women who do processing of fish products, or even forest products, actually, and bring them into the bank, provide them with loans in the form of working capital, and actually buying small equipments and all of that. One of the biggest success criteria was how many I could enroll and how much loans, how many loans and the amount of loans given, but also the rate of repayment of those loans. That was the most eye-opening work for me. Because I realized that this project was housed in this bank. But this bank had very rigid conditions for access to credit. And although this project was supposed to bankerize, to bring the most vulnerable, what we do call those who are not seen as credit worthy by the bank, to bring them into the system. But keeping the same rules as everybody else. That was a difficult task. I was very conflicted because really engaging with these people, preparing them to understand how the system works, prepare their dossier, applications, get a loan, was extremely difficult. But then to defend these dossiers with the administration, the credit committee, was always a big task because people didn't see my clients as viable. So it was really tough. I knew very quickly that this institution was not the right institution for this project, because perhaps the government and the funders were hoping that by bringing this project into the bank, this would influence the bank to review its own procedures and maybe have procedures for most vulnerable people. But that was not the case. We did the project with mitigated success. But then I was very interested in terms of learning more about what were alternative ways of really providing access to finance or services for the poor. So I took a leave of absence. I was lucky to have a scholarship funded by the US government. And I went to the US, to Ohio State University, to study rural finance and microfinance. So when I came back after 2 years to this bank, I really wanted to make changes and propose new approaches. But it was just like talking to a wall. People wouldn't hear what I was talking about.
Even after coming from your furthering your studies.
You know, it was one of the biggest disappointments of my life. You know, by the way, when I came back, they just told me, oh yeah, you are back, this is great. Maybe you can go and be a branch manager in Moore, you know, just around here. You know, the story I was talking about. And I was writing notes, meeting some of the directors, they would say, oh yeah, that's great. But then nothing.
Nothing happens,
You know, after 1 year, I just felt that I needed movement and I was not ready, you know, to cope with this. So I decided to resign. And I resigned and joined Oxfam. And as a senior program officer. So supporting the agriculture portfolio, but also the microfinance system. That's where I come. I met somebody, a colleague, who was in Boston, whom we had shared interests. And he had done savings-led microfinance
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Asia.
Okay.
So we talked, and I expressed my interest to try this in Africa. He was great enough. So we found some seed money and to start testing this in Mali and in Senegal.
Seneca, yeah.
So this was called Saving for Change. And it was really building on traditional secular knowledge of the people based on roscas.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what was done new is adding interest into the rosca so that the power of compound interest can grow.
Right,
and
right.
members didn't have to take when their turn comes and they didn't have a project.
Yeah.
Only you would take a loan only if you needed the resources for a specific project and repay with interest. So if you didn't need, you wouldn't take, but your money will work for you. And we saw after 1 year, the fund accumulated is divided into equal parts for equal parts to the members.
Yeah.
And members would make up to 40% actually profit on what they have been their weekly saving.
Which was higher than if they had put their money
anywhere else.
Yeah.
It blew on my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we decided, no, we have to put this in scale. And that's how we started actually partnering with another organization called the Strom Foundation, which provided the funding. And we started developing and spreading this program in Mali.
Yeah.
In very short time, it was reaching record number of people.
Yeah.
And we reached over 700,000 women in Mali alone when we stopped counting, because at some point we were not able to count anymore. Because we trained some members of the group as a strategy and equipped them with pictorial manuals so that they can go and train other people. So at some point we lost control in terms of the numbers. Moved it to Burkina Faso, moved it to Senegal. Many other organizations have adopted this, and I believe that probably today impact is in millions. Recently, many years after, 10 years after, I went back to Mali for another thing. It was about food crisis. And I visited places where we had these savings groups. Actually, those families who had members in the savings groups were more resilient to the food security than those who have not been. So there have been many other benefits about that. So that was really an amazing...
But it seems like that also follows you, because as you then get to Rockefeller in East Africa, part of your mandate there and some of the stuff that you did also still spoke to issues of financial inclusion, agriculture, etc., etc. So maybe let's talk a bit about the time at the Rockefeller Foundation, and just identify some of the key things that Mamadou looks back and says, I was part of this at the time when I was at the foundation.
But I want to say something just before, because I think this is extremely important. Before, I think I was just a technocrat, a technical guy and all of that. But I didn't understand the relationship between power, policy, and poverty. And I think that initiation is something that I really learned at Oxfam. To understand really about, it's not bringing the solution to a problem. It's about going to the root causes. What maintains people in poverty? And how do you address that? And what is the role of policy in that? So basically the triptych of really saving lives through humanitarian intervention, building prosperity through development programs, but also building power and agency of people and changing the root causes of challenges through policy advocacy is something that I've been initiated at Oxfam, and which I applied and worked in many sectors, whether it is agriculture or the extractive sector, to the point that to lead advocacy to get the first mining ECOWAS mining directives to try to stop the race to the bottom, you know, among countries competing with mining, for mining companies. All of that impact actually, I think, prepared me for the next type of. So I understood. That's where I learned about systems change. And, you know, the power of policy. It's not just about, you know, development programs. It's about advocacy as well to create conducive.
And look at where we are now, so many years back, and today, even in this conference, the dimensions that we are looking at are policy, power, politics, people, systems change.
Exactly.
And this is so many years ago when you did that.
Exactly. You know, this is why when I went to the Rockefeller Foundation, I think two programs that I've been extremely proud of. One was really Digital Jobs Africa, because very early we knew that the youth bulge that we are seeing in Africa, demographics, population growth compared to economic growth is going to create a problem. But also we saw there was an opportunity probably in the increasing and progressive digitization in processes, you know, regardless of the sector, that there was an opportunity for new jobs. And you know, what is interesting is that digital and ICT is a low barrier to entry, you know, for young people. So we focus on young people that were that didn't have higher education, and were not in jobs, and were not seen by anybody as a viable workforce. So those are completely left out by systems. And we said, actually, how do you train these people to digital skills, actually, and get them to the workforce? And that meant also not just demonstrating it could work by training them to literacy, numeracy, and digital skills, but it was important as well to work with employers, meaning the private sector, to change their mindset. And that those people, they usually think, who are well dressed, have a high education diploma and all of that, are probably good employees, but that didn't make those who didn't non-viable. And there was an opportunity to look at them and give them the opportunity, and especially for entry-level jobs. And that meant also gathering and documenting that evidence, building the business case for the government to say, okay, this is actually possible. What are the incentives and policies that you can put in place to enable this to happen at scale? So that was really an amazing program and very exciting. We worked in 6 countries: South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, and Morocco, to showcase this. So we learned a lot. And we learned that actually, working with the private sector, that what we assumed was what they wanted was not exactly what they wanted. Especially when we focus on the outsourcing sector. Because, you know, the outsourcing sector is highly competitive, and there is high attrition rates. People could move to the next company just for a $20 increase in your salary. You know, so there is a very limited pool of young people that many companies compete upon. So it drives up the wages, but also people don't have the rights. So we said, okay, maybe here if we train, then there will be opportunity to link training and job and placement. And that was the case. But the thing was, employers were telling us one thing, you know, you don't have to worry about the digital skills and the technical skills. We can train for the technical skills. But what we can't train for are the soft skills. And we say, what are the soft skills? And it's the soft skills are what? You know, just waking up and showing up to work on time on a consistent basis. That's not a skill you can see always. You know, when you are at work, actually being disciplined and being concentrated on your work for the time you are required. You know, learning and trying to actually always speak well, speak rightly, you know, and actually try to improve on your work every day. Those are what we call the soft skills. But there is no school where people are trained for that.
For that, that's true.
So that helped us actually develop the concept of training for employability with many other partners. And we worked with Making Sense International actually to develop a manual about how do you train for soft skills and how do you create those programs. So I think that this has been, and we supported many other organizations that actually developed many new ways of sourcing the people using even AI, how to optimize that. And that was really a great partnership with the private sector, but also a lot of knowledge was generated. And at the end of the day, what happened is that we developed the concept of impact sourcing. So how then do you incentivize companies to hire these young people because they can use it to show that they are good citizens in the countries where they are making their business? And that's impact sourcing. How do you source people with impact? Which means how do you give an employment opportunity to people that otherwise would never have access to that? And we created even a standard and a certification so that like an organization can have a badge and say, I do impact sourcing. I employ young people, you know, who because they are from disadvantaged background or they have a disability or what have you, actually bringing them into the workforce. We launched it in South Africa in 2017 with 8 companies. Today it is a global movement. It is the Global Impact Sourcing Coalition that has over 60, 70 global corporates actually improving the standards, spreading it and adopting it and providing that opportunity.
You know, I would want us to look at the visa time, but I think our guest of honor might be here. But one key moment for you at Visa before you then went to Harare that you might want to just leave for our viewers, and then, you know, we can also post some of the stuff that you have done.
No, for me, the biggest thing at Visa is actually educating Visa people at all. I think that when I came to Visa at head of social impact, not at Visa Foundation because I was in the corporate. Many of my colleagues saw me probably and my function as a function that would support sales. How do you do better business? So I was the popular guy. All my colleagues were coming and saying, how can I work with you, you know, to win more business and all of that. And how do you use this to actually increase the visibility and the reputation of Visa? And it was really interesting to really educate and say, you know, actually this is not about sales. This is about how are you becoming a purpose-driven company? How are you being a good citizen? Actually, that think about how do you positively impact society so that that positive impact you make in society is turning back and impacting on your reputation. And in fine, win you more business. So that's a long tail and process. And that's really also acknowledging that as a global company who work in different markets, you have services and you have the power of changing people's lives. If you look at innovation in those services, not only in how they function, how you price them, how do you introduce them, and who do you work with to actually get them to reach people that you couldn't reach. So that was an exciting moment.
I mean, that's so fascinating. I would want us to explore that. Maybe in another time we might catch up, maybe in Harare or somewhere, just to also take a look at some of the successes that you would have achieved maybe a year or two down the line, given that you just took over a year ago. Mamadou, thank you so much for joining me and joining us on this special occasion in the sidelines of the fourth conference held by several partners on African philanthropy. Thank you so much, Mamadou.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
That was Mamadou Biteye, currently with the Africa Capacity Building Foundation based in Harare. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.